the application session. And when we mean applications in the context of conversation search, we here mean 4 papers that are in the e-commerce and cooking domain. So one that is very broad and super popular, and one that is maybe a bit more niche but equally interesting. We have 2 on-site talks and 2 online talks, and we start off with an online talk by Abhisek from the Indian Institute of Technology, who will talk about fairness and interpretability.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Is it visible?
Not yet. Yes, now it is.
Let me also try some transitions. Yeah. I hope we are good.
Yes.
Okay. So let me start then. I'm hearing an echo. Is it because there it's being played, right? Okay. So hello everyone. This is Abhisek, and I shall be presenting our work on fairness and interpretability issues in e-commerce search through smart speakers. It is a joint work in collaboration with researchers from IIT Kharagpur, IIT Delhi, and MPISW Saarbrücken. This work was accepted in the WebConf 2022. All of us are conversant with e-commerce search on Amazon desktop. Suppose after this SCAI'22 week, you wish to go for a hike and need a backpack for the same. You will enter the search query on the search bar, and upon clicking the search button, a number of search results will appear with their metadata in the decreasing order of their relevance. Contrast to that, when you search through a smart speaker like Alexa Echo Dot, the customer asks the smart speaker, let's say, Alexa, buy me a hiking backpack. The response that Alexa provides usually is something like this. We divide it into 2 primary parts, an audio response and a default action. Now let's take a look at it in a bit more depth. The highlighted box is the query string in your command. Then the next portion is the product detail that Alexa is essentially recommending to the customer. The product detail includes title, price, delivery date, etc. The highlighted red box is a brief explanation that Alexa is providing, which is in this case, Amazon's choice. There are several other explanations that it provides. For more details, you can look through the paper. When Alexa says the newly highlighted portion, the default action of adding the product to the customer's cart takes place. And when you want to complete the transaction, you will have to say, order it now. Now, if we compare the 2 modes of interaction on the grounds of availability of choices and the autonomy to the customer, there is a reduction in both aspects in search through a smart speaker as opposed to a more traditional setup like desktop search. We posit that such restricted autonomy on the part of the customer, where the entire decision is made by the digital system, warrants the voice assistants to be more responsible and trustworthy in its response. Therefore, in this paper, we explore the following 2 research questions. How do customers interpret the explanations given in the audio response by the voice assistant? Second question, how fair is the default action by the voice assistant? Now let's get into the first research question regarding customers' interpretation of the explanations. I would have loved to actually go through the entire detailed motivation of the thing, but maybe we can discuss that in the question answer session. So there are several challenges in understanding customers' interpretation of these explanations, because they have several semantics and nuances attached. And moreover, unlike traditional mediums like desktop search, customers across the globe are not that conversant with these systems. So to understand customers' interpretations, we need a baseline which should be more interpretable or popular among the customer base. So in this case, in this particular work, we choose to contrast the customer's interpretation with the corresponding observation on a traditional medium. That is, for this paper, it's observation on desktop search for Amazon. This brings us to another important challenge: how to design an effective data collection framework for such an analysis. So this slide shows the data collection pipeline that we have set up for the work. Provided a query string, we generate an audio signal of the sentence, "Alexa, buy me a query string." Then the audio signal is played to the Alexa Echo Dot device, and simultaneously the query is fired to the Amazon desktop browser. Then we collect the response from the systems in both the cases, both the cases, and also collect the product metadata of the product which was added to cart by Alexa, as well as which were shown on the search engine result page on desktop search. For meaningful comparison, we tried to make the context of these two data collection setups as much similar as possible by keeping it for the same user account, location of search, delivery address, and all things considered. We repeated this process for 1,000 queries and recorded the responses from Alexa as well as that on Amazon desktop browser. The experiment was conducted in Amazon's Indian marketplace using Echo Dot device, which is available in India. We also collected 14 temporal snapshots to understand the stability and consistency of our result for 100 most searched keywords on Amazon. To our knowledge, this is the first of its kind data collection framework. And in order to get access to the data, interested people can fill the form at the given link. Now, of the 1,000 queries, we found that in 66% cases, the explanation provided by Alexa was Amazon's choice, like shown in this slide. So in this talk, I shall discuss the most prevalent explanation, which is Amazon's choice. An interested audience can look into the paper for more detailed observation of the other explanations. Now, what exactly is Amazon's choice? The phrase itself is not very informative. However, Amazon defines it as, it highlights highly rated and well-priced product available to ship immediately. Now, this brief description itself provides us with two nuances without succinctly defining either. Now, to see what customers understand from these different explanations, we conducted a user survey among 100 respondents. Majority of our respondents were well-versed with the Amazon e-commerce marketplace, and we asked them different questions regarding interpretation of these different nuances, expected position of product with such explanations, and their purchase likelihood, etc. Let's go through them one by one. For Amazon's choice, our first question to customers was, what do they interpret by a product to be highly rated? According to 59% of the respondents, a product with more than 4 average user rating than 5 is considered to be highly rated. Indeed, that was the case. All 662 queries where Alexa added the product to the cart with Amazon's choice explanation, the products were actually very highly rated. Upon being asked about their interpretation of what a well-priced product means, 61% respondents said that the price of the product should be at least among the lowest 5 prices on the result page. However, we observed that in merely 23% cases, Amazon's choice product adhered to this interpretation of a well-priced product. So while Amazon's choice products were highly rated, they did not fall under the interpretation of what people might consider well-priced. Going through another top explanation, a top result where the interpretation was predominantly, it should be the top position, the position 1 product. However, in 81% cases, we saw that that is actually not the case. So this particular table basically highlights the summary that we received from the survey that we performed. Thus, the interpretation of respondents and the observations on traditional medium do not align with each other in a significant majority of the cases. Even more worryingly, these observations are not based on a solitary snapshot. Rather, they consistently appear on the different search snapshots that we collected. Now, further, more than half of the respondents opine that they are likely or very likely to purchase a product with such explanation, thus highlighting the positive nudging ability of these phrases like Amazon's choice or a top result, etc., which naturally flows into our second research question on the fairness aspect of the product selection. Now, as shown in this figure, the default action of Alexa is to add the product to the customer's cart. Notice the non-selection of the most relevant product in such cases may have unfairness concerns for both sellers and customers on the marketplace. For brevity, in this talk, I shall cover only the way we quantified the fairness concerns towards customers. To understand the fairness concern from the customer's perspective, we conducted a survey among the same 100 participants and asked them their preferences. Each customer was shown a product which was added to cart by Alexa and the top organic search result as per Amazon's own search engine result rank. Then they were asked which of the two products they preferred to buy. In an overwhelming 73% cases, we found that the respondents' preference and that of Alexa did not match at all. Out of the 1,000 evaluations, in 73% cases, customers preferred the top Amazon search result, that is the desktop search result, over the product which was added to cart by Alexa. Now, this observation further underpins the potential customer dissatisfaction that can be caused due to the default action of Alexa. And to summarize the findings of our work, we find a significant gap between the customer's interpretation and the observation in a traditional mediums for the different explanations. We also found that in a significant fraction of the cases, the default action taken by the voice assistant is neither fair to customers, nor was it fair to the producers. To reiterate our primary argument, given customers cede complete autonomy to the smart speakers, their response and the action need to be more responsible for such interactions. We hope that the findings of this work will motivate researchers to understand and mitigate these issues to build a more trustworthy voice assistant and seamless experience for customers. Thank you very much. For more details, feel free to go through the paper and connect with us. I'll be happy to take any questions later. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. I was wondering what other types of explanations besides just saying Amazon's choice do you imagine could bring the voice experience closer to the web search experience?
Okay, so as such, okay, let me just go to that summary slide. Yeah, so Amazon's choice was one of the explanations. Our top result was another explanation. Now, there were several other explanations as well, but unfortunately, there was a gap between the customer's interpretation and that which is probably meant by Alexa. Now, in such cases, maybe some more informative things like, let's say, if Alexa is recommending a product to the customer, maybe some, let's say, a summary of the positive reviews that the product has got, or something which is more informative regarding the goodness of this particular product might actually be helpful in a better decision making. That said, it's basically a trade-off that how much information you want to provide and how much information load that you want to provide to the customers. But maybe a phrase like, let's say, Amazon's choice, which does not really provide any insight into the product or its quality for the customer, that might be a better addition than, let's say, a phrase like Amazon's choice. And just to add to this question, like, let's say, our top result. Well, we understand that when someone says our top result, it can actually come from, let's say, the first position or second position or third position. But the general public, they may not actually be interpreting it that way. If they, like, let's say, our top result and the top result, there is a very, very subtle difference in the wording, but it goes a long way in the difference in the meaning. So maybe those are some of the things which needs to be addressed in the explanations. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Then maybe I have one last question. So you did this for Alexa and Amazon India, as you said.
Yeah.
Do you think you can just roll over the same setup to all kinds of other smart speakers and e-commerce sites, or did you do something that's specific to Amazon/Alexa?
Well, the data collection that we did, like the setup that we had is for Alexa, and like how it is basically tailored to how Alexa stores the information and all these things so that we can retrieve it. But I would strongly say that yes, this sort of a setup can be reproduced for any other e-commerce platform in any other marketplace, let's say in US or UK or things like that. But the specific reason behind our choice, like why we go for Amazon and Alexa, is because our interest was to study the e-commerce search. Amazon and Alexa is basically coming from the same parent organization. So essentially, inherently, we are basically thinking that, oh, this search result is being produced by the same organization. This explanation is produced is also coming from the same set of choice architects. So it's basically customers are interacting with the search system, but via two different mediums from the same parent organization. So we were just trying to have that sort of a thing in the place for the comparisons to be more meaningful.
Okay, great. Let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.
So this second speaker is on site and is already getting ready. And this is Andrea Papenmeier from the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany. And she will talk about how to elicit conversational strategies from dialogues.
All right. Yes, hi everyone, I'm Andrea Papenmeier, and together with Alex over there from the University of Regensburg and Dagmar Kern from the GESIS Institute for the Social Sciences, we research what we can learn from human-human dialogues for designing virtual assistants. Oh yeah, the other way. All right, so one problem that we often come across in product search is that customers or users are not always able to clearly communicate what exactly they're looking for, at least not in a way that a machine can easily understand. So sometimes users have some rough idea about a product which they are able to explain to a friend, but once they have to type it into a machine, they don't know how to formulate their request and end up withholding information about their needs. So it would be helpful if they could interact with search systems in natural language like they would do in actual stores when they describe their needs to a salesperson. We do have some technical solutions like voice assistants or chatbots, but they are not yet refined enough to provide a good user experience, especially when it comes to anything that is more complex than simple voice commands. And products can be quite complex. Think, for example, about a technical product like a laptop, where you can, at least in theory, you can configure hundreds of attributes. Or think about fashion products, where attributes are very vague and can be interpreted in many different ways, like which color is still considered to be red, right? There's like a fluent boundary. So how should a voice system ask for user requirements, and how should it deal with vagueness and words that need interpretation? So Alex and I thought, let's learn from the best. Let's see how humans deal with those situations. So we set up a user study in which we looked at human-human conversations in product consulting. We selected the laptops and a recipe domain because in both domains, people have complex, that is multifaceted information needs. For that, we connected a knowledgeable expert with a customer who is advised on which product to buy. Due to COVID, we used an online setting via Zoom, which in fact had the advantage for us that we could just turn off the cameras so that participants would actually concentrate on the conversations. Before the start, we gave our participants scenario prompts to set a general frame of reference for the conversations, and we told our experts that they should find a product on the internet that would fit the customer's need and send the link via Zoom's chat function. We also told them that the session is over once a suitable product is found. So that was kind of our ending condition, but to give you an idea of how this looked like, I have a prototypical conversation here. Usually the expert started with some questions, then searched for a fitting product online, copied the link in the chat, and the conversations usually went on for a bit because the two were talking about the product until then the customer eventually decided that this is indeed a suitable and relevant product for them. Then we transcribed the dialogues, annotated them with dialogue acts, which you can see here, but the annotation process is described in more detail in the paper. Now, based on the annotations, we then searched for commonalities in the dialogues. First, we looked at the distribution of dialogue acts of the utterances in the conversations. So the diagram here shows how many utterances were questions, informing statements, or any other types of acts. And we look at the conversation before the first link was sent and after the link was sent. You can see that before the product link was sent, experts asked almost twice as many questions as after the link was sent. Now, looking at the informing statements, so for example, explanations or answers to the questions, we see the inverse behavior. So experts informed more after the link was sent, while customers informed more before they got the link. So you see that the roles that the experts and customers take on, those roles change during the conversation. We have a proactive expert in the beginning and an informing agent after sending the link. We also took a closer look into the first part of the conversation where experts asked the questions because we wanted to know how do the experts elicit information needs of the customer. So here we look at the first 3 questions asked in the conversations. In our language, we have different types of questions, right? So we have very open questions, for example, what do you want to cook? And we can have more closed questions like choice questions, so A or B, or questions that can be answered by yes or no, or check questions that basically just ask for agreement, like you wanted a salad, right? In our conversations, we saw the experts asking more open questions in the beginning, followed by more closed questions afterwards. So you see here a strategy to elicit and identify the needs of the customers, going from very broad general questions to very specific closed questions. A third observation that we made during the analysis was the frequent communication of understanding. So if we have another look at the distribution of dialogue acts, we see that both agents use so-called auto acts, which are utterances like, okay, I see, or interjections like, mm-hmm. This is something that did not take up much time during the conversation because it was often just a single word. But looking at the utterances, it becomes quite clear that this is really an important part of the conversations. So especially the experts did that a lot when listening to the information needs at the beginning of the conversations. Maybe because there's a difference in knowledge, so the experts did that to encourage the user to talk more about their needs and make them feel at ease. So what do our findings mean for the design of new conversational assistants in product search? From our findings, we derive some design recommendations. First, systems should be proactively inquiring the user about their needs and be ready to answer questions about the products after presenting them. That means systems should be ready to argue for and answer questions about the products that it has deemed suitable for the user. Then secondly, systems should be able to narrow down the information needs, going from general questions to more user-specific questions. And then lastly, systems should reassure the users that their input was received and understood. Some users might not know the technical terms, so it is good to tell them if and what was understood by the system. Now, ideally, those recommendations make it easier for users to feel safe and well cared for when using virtual assistants for product search. There are some more detailed findings in our paper, for example, an analysis of the topics of the conversations, but I'd be happy to take some questions now. Thank you.
So while you can think of a question, I take the first one from the chat. So the question is from Yamen. Other dialogue act occurs quite high in the utterances. Do you have a sense to what kind of intent do others cover?
Let me go back. Yeah, here you can already see that. So I mean, they're all there are a couple of different conversational acts, like the greetings, for example, or thanking the person at the end of the conversation. And I mean, question and inform, of course, together, that takes up most of the time because we have a consulting session, so it's mostly like someone asking a question, the other one responding, and so on. And then, of course, yeah, like I said, the greetings in the beginning and the end. There were some things like agreement acts, which, yeah, we haven't looked at in more detail. But I think it's just because there are so many other types that it looks like it's a big part. But if you just look at auto-X informed question, that's already like most of the part of the conversation, which is quite, yeah, striking.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a question from the audience? Come on, I know it's the last day of the conference. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So I was wondering, what do you think is the limitation of the current methods, especially when it comes to systems understanding where the limitations of their knowledge is? Because ultimately it comes down to the user expressing something and the system being able to answer it. But if it doesn't know the answer, where do you think the biggest problem lies in current methods, and where do you think we should be pushing?
Yeah, so I'm more from the HCI side, so I might not be like on the state of the art of what concerns the technical solutions. But I think, if you type, for example, a jacket and then a brand into Amazon, then you see that in the facets, this brand still appears, but it's not ticked. So the system is able to, maybe with click-through data or so on, is able to retrieve correct results, but it doesn't have like the understanding of what the user actually wants. So it doesn't actively make sense of what the user has typed into the search bar. I think that's one of the major constraints that systems have at the moment. Maybe that's also a good question for the discussion later on, because I mean, I could go on for half an hour about that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Then I have a question. I did not read the whole paper. That's why maybe the question is answered in the paper. But this looks like a very intense lab study. How many hours did it take to just do the recordings and the annotations? Can you have like some general ballpark figure?
So we scheduled like, I think 50 minutes for each of those consulting sessions, so it wasn't that long. There was a difference. I think I actually have slides about that. About the conversation links. So you see that there is quite a difference in how long those conversations were. Some were like 5 minutes, some took longer, like 10 minutes or 50 minutes. We actually then had someone else transcribe the dialogue, so we had some students helping us out, which was great. But it is quite labor intensive. Like, yes, definitely. We only had 24 conversations, and it took us quite a long time to get through all the data because we wanted to look at it in much detail. And yeah, it's really intense. That's true.
I can imagine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker is also on site. It's a colleague of yours that also co-wrote this paper. It's Alexander Frummet from the University of Regensburg in the south of Germany. And he will talk about a very interesting domain, which is cooking.
So, hello everyone. I'm talking about a TOIS paper I submitted, which is about understanding cooking-related information needs in conversational search, which was joint work with my supervisor David Elsweiler and Bernd Ludwig. So to start right off, I first of all want to contextualize my research. So we all know Alexa is great for setting timers, getting the weather forecast for the day, but also let's consider smart home setting for changing the color or for changing the light color in your house, for instance. But what if dialogues are getting more complex? Consider, for instance, this. You want to make creme brulee. So you might ask, how do I prepare creme brulee? Then your assistant might just read out the steps, whisk milk cream, and so on. And in the end, you need to somehow caramelize the sugar with a kitchen torch. However, since you're not that experienced in cooking, you have no clue how to do this. And at that point, Alexa will probably not be able to guide you properly through this interaction and assist you, and it in the end won't work well for this kind of situation. And since we want to avoid such a situation when you are using a kitchen torch, we will need to think about how we can solve this problem and how we can make such systems better. So we, in the end, want to go beyond simply providing results or factoid results. We want to more understand the actual process and the human conversations that are behind these type of interactions. So, as I said, we need to study human conversations to also understand the user information needs, to then design systems that can assist in such situations properly. And at that point, there didn't exist any like naturalistic study that would elicit such information needs from human conversations. And that's exactly what we basically did. So we created a naturalistic corpus and derived information need taxonomy from this corpus. So what were the goals of our research? Research question 1 was about which information needs occur when you're cooking with a conversational assistant, then how these information needs are communicated linguistically, and finally, can these cooking-related information needs be predicted in a conversational assistant scenario? So how do we get the data? What I did was I took a box of ingredients, so this is a sample box you can see here, and went to the homes of 45 people with this box, told them to take these ingredients, and they could literally cook anything they wanted. And what we had in the end was an assistant situation where they were cooking and I was mimicking the smart assistant, and we were running a conversation. So when they had a question, I would just respond to them and provide the answer or assistance linguistically. In the end, I had like 40 hours of recordings, which needed to be transcribed. Apart from these 40 hours of recordings, I also had some delicious meals throughout the whole process, so it was kind of worth it. But yeah, having this huge amount of speech data, the next step was then to create an information need taxonomy to have a fine-grained understanding of the information needs or of the variety of information needs that can come up in such a conversation. So as you can see, it's quite a lot. I will just pick out a few to give you a glance of what I'm talking about. I mean, of course, there were a lot of amount-related questions, such as how much flour do I need, but also questions regarding the process. Participants asked, for instance, and now we need to add zucchini and corn, right? So it's about, what do I need to do next? But also, since I didn't give them any recipe before they would need to cook or they are forced to cook, there was also an initial recipe search, recipe retrieval stage, and also for this kind of information needs, there are a lot of different nuances that could be detected in that collection. So in total, there were 2,376 queries that actually expressed an information need. And if we take a step back and take a step back from that huge taxonomy, I was trying to figure out some patterns in these information needs, and I came up with I could identify two main information need types in the end, which are fact-based needs and competence-oriented needs. So the main difference there is that for the fact-based needs, it was enough for me as an assistant to simply provide fact-based information, like, for instance, when I have a amount question, how much flour do I need? And I say, well, do I need you answer with 100 grams, for instance, and that's enough. However, when it's getting more complicated and you need, as a user, you need more guidance, you need more assistance. These kind of needs, which are preparation and cooking technique, were labeled then as competence-oriented information needs, since more assistance was provided there. That's kind of the main difference. And also, in terms of annotation, it was much easier to Annotate hadn't assigned labels to fact-based needs, since there were discriminative words used mainly, like amount-related questions always have that, how much blah, blah, blah do I need? However, for the competence-oriented needs, I need to understand I had to understand the conversational context even more. Yeah. Then now having this huge taxonomy, I was interested in how information needs were actually communicated. So I found three main types of communications. So first of all, we have explicit and implicit queries, which occurred quite frequently. Then also users made use of reassurances, and discourse markers and linguistic feedback were occur quite often. So consider, for instance, this script. When a participant is asking, and now we need to add the zucchini and corn, right? He's basically saying, or uttering a kind of a reassurance. So is it correct what I'm doing right now? And also with that discourse marker, and I mean, Andrea already mentioned it in the previous talk. It's just 3 characters. It's just a small word, but what does it convey to the assistant? It's like, okay, I understood what you said. Now proceed with the next step. And this is what I considered as, or what is basically linguistic feedback that occurred really often in this experiment. After this whole qualitative process, I was also trying to see if I can use this naturalistic data to predict the information needs. So what I did was I had a query such as how much flour do I need, passed it on to a fine-tuned German BERT model with various or different amounts of context, performed tenfold cross-validation. And one of the main outcomes was, there are other analyses you can look up on the paper, but what I found quite relevant is that it was much easier to detect fact-based information needs than competence-oriented information needs, which kind of also aligns with the findings from the annotation process. So what was the challenge? It's all about the context. So we have these task-related contexts, which are things such as cooking tasks that are running in parallel when you're preparing the meal, but also, of course, since we have that human-human conversations, there's a lot of linguistic context going on there, such as ambiguous utterances. And so, what are the next steps? With that naturalistic corpus, we can really, it's great for understanding user information needs, but what if we want to scale things up, and what if we want to actually implement such systems? We need to get some data so that would be the best case, have these kind of linguistic, or the features that this naturalistic corpus has, and run experiments on this. So the next step for me will be then, how do we find the right answer to a conversational query in the cooking context? That's the second part of my PhD now. And that's more on the controlled side, but I somehow want to make sure that I get a data collection that covers at least some of the features that also this naturalistic corpus has. Yeah, so that's it for me. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm happy to ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Let's start there. Oh, lots of questions. We go from the front to the back.
Hi, Alexander. Hi. Thank you very much for the talk. Also Alexander from Germany, Halle University. I was a bit surprised that you didn't have for report subjective questions. So I'm wondering something like whether your participants never ask something like, do you think would it be okay? It's not a fact, but kind of asking for opinion, or you observed these questions, but you put it just in the competence context, because for me, competence asking about recipes is also more like factual based. So the question is just whether they were subjective or opinion questions coming from the participants.
So you mean the competence ones, or?
No, you showed just factual and competence, but I didn't see example something like do you think would this be fine, like, asking
Oh,
on
I
our
see, I see.
opinions? So whether they were such questions and maybe you just didn't show them here.
Yeah, I mean, there actually came up some questions on what my opinion was on this, but actually they didn't occur that frequently, and I didn't really, I mean, if I could answer it grounded on something I found on the internet, because as you might know, I had that laptop in front of me because I'm not that an expert in cooking. I mean, now maybe a bit, but not at that point. I mean, if I could somehow find it or on the internet or got a good knowledge source I can argue with, then I kind of explained it to them, but if not, then it didn't come up then, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Hi, Carlos Gelman from the University of Glasgow. I was wondering how you feel these conversations reflect the user needs versus other data collection methods. So for instance, in general, prompting users to ask questions that are grounded in knowledge and having them really revolve around the task is quite challenging, as we've seen in other experiments. Do you feel this reflects, the experimental setup that you have here reflects a realistic user study for how people would really interact in the ideal scenario where the agent is as capable as a person?
I think, yeah, yes. I mean, the difference is and I mean, that might be a limitation of my study. It wasn't a real mixed initiative conversation, which, as we know, is also, especially for knowledge-grounded conversations with agents, desirable. But I was rather acting as a passive, no wizard, but passive person, to just not nudge them in any direction, so I can really focus on what they are actually asking me to get an idea of the user information needs in this. Yeah.
All right, thanks. There was a question at the back. Yes.
Daria Alexander, Radboud University. So my question is, you divided the needs into fact-based and competence-oriented, and you said that competence-oriented needs need much more context than factual needs. So what are the main reasons why they need much more content?
So what made annotation for fact-based needs much easier was how they were conveyed linguistically. So for needs like amount, there was always that linguistic pattern: how much, how many. For time, it was always how long does it take, you see. But for preparation and cooking technique, we sometimes only have that So from a linguistic perspective, if you have a look at the words that people are saying in this, you can't really tell if something was a preparation or cooking technique need, for instance.
So for example, if you are given the instructions and the person only responds and you don't have any more details or context to have more information in those terms, or?
I mean, usually it was like, when I start reading the recipe and then he's saying, I knew, well, need to go on with the next step, because I as a human can interpret this.
Yes.
But I think what's also interesting here is the distinction of preparation and cooking technique as labels, because preparation is focused on the information which you find within the recipe, whereas cooking techniques are, let's say you need to prepare asparagus. The process of how to cut it and do all these pre-processing steps for asparagus might not be there in the recipe, and you would need to get it from another knowledge source. And it was kind of challenging to understand whether it's an actual preparation need or cooking technique related need in the end.
Yeah, and it's also a challenge that you need to act as a chatbot, so not as a person. Thanks.
All right, and we take one last question from the online audience. So Ramesh says, I just read it out. Very cool. Are you looking at visual cues as well?
I tried. I mean, I'm not free from my surroundings, but I try to not use I saw what people are doing, but I didn't intervene at all. And when they said, well, am I doing this right? And they were pointing on the pot, I just didn't answer because I was saying, well, I can't do this because I don't have eyes as a system, you see. Yeah, but I didn't look at this in the study, so it's spoken only. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, our last speaker is online. That's Ramesh Manuvinakurike from Interlabs, who will talk about human-in-the-loop approaches to conversational search.
Right, thank you. Right, I hope you can see my screen. Please let me know if you can't.
Not yet, wait a second. Now we can.
Okay, perfect. So we are from Interlabs, and we are looking at human-in-the-loop approaches for conversational task guidance system development. So the goal of our work is to develop a dialogue system for task guidance. So really the task guidance can really be any situated task. For instance, cooking, really cool talk that we just saw, manufacturing, which involves a lot of task performances, system maintenance, for example, something is broken, we have to go and fix it. That's also considered task guidance, and other daily tasks like changing tires, for example, is a task, and developing a task system for such a task guidance scenario is our long-term goal. Now, the human-in-the-loop part of the title of the work is really to engage the humans who are really doing the task, the non-AI developers, the non-annotators, into how to get them into the process of system development, right? So this is one of the important problems that we are taking a look at. So the first problem statement that we are looking at in this work is to develop a resource, right? Numerous resources already exist for task guidance, and these data sets are amazing. They're really huge. We can learn really good representations, multimodal, in fact, and we can go ahead and build very good classifiers, for example, action recognition classifiers. Right? But one of the aspects which is often overlooked in resources like this is the conversational aspect. And we want to address this issue. And that gets to our work, which is really to develop a data set and develop a set of baselines for the subtasks. And what are the subtasks, right? Enumerate the subtasks for conversational task guidance that will help the users in performing the task, right? So we want to take a stab at that. So some of the subtasks that we are looking at in the task guidance system development are listed here, right? One of the most important thing is the retrieval, the search problem, right? Which is really, as people are performing the task, we want to retrieve from the spec or the recipe document and highlight it to the user, right? For example, the example that Alex just mentioned, right? Like, which is if someone is preparing the ingredients and if the recipe document says prepare the ingredients, we want to highlight that for them so that they can ground their whole process execution to this particular document. The second subproblem is the semantic frame extraction, which is the understanding part of the whole problem, right? Which is to kind of get this fine-grained representation of a particular step as a semantic frame, which will help us do more fine-grained understanding of a given task. For example, what tool are they using for a particular step, right? The third most important task for us is the question generation or the generation problem. I say question generation here. Why I say that will become more clear in the coming slides. And the next important task is the task breakdown. For instance, prepare ingredients, right? What does prepare ingredients actually mean? What do they entail, right? This shares resemblance to a lot of the recent works in the common sense reasoning or task breakdown literature. And this becomes really important here. So we are trying to get them, like into one, data set, right? There are other aspects which are multimodal action recognition. There are really good data sets for that, much larger, thousands of hours, which might be better to learn a good representation, for example. But our data set could help, to use these representations and then fine tune. And then, of course, the dialogue system policy development. So let's take a look at an example, right? So what does task guidance actually mean and what does it look like? What should I do next in a cooking domain? Minced garlic, right? In a domain which is manufacturing related, what should I use now, right? Inform them about tools, right? Positive screwdriver, right? The other thing is for debugging, for maintenance purposes, right? I think something went wrong. What should I do now, right? Have you put the batteries in the right order, right? So these are some examples of task guidance and what kind of goal the system should kind of aim towards, right? So as developers of this system, we are looking at these questions, right? How do we develop such a system, and how will it know, what should happen in all these scenarios, right? So in order to get there, to develop the system, the first thing what we did was we swapped the problem, right? Learn from the experts, learn from humans who are performing the task, and let the dialogue system, instead of helping them do the task, instead of developing such a system first, what if we learn a system which can really learn from them first and use this learning to then do the task guidance, right? So the same questions are swapped here, right? The system asks, what are you doing? What will you do next? I'll be mincing garlic next. What are you using now? Same thing, but it's just swapped, right? So this kind of a paradigm will help us learn the representation for a particular dialogue system, right? And this paradigm is heavily leveraged in action recognition literature, for example, for a lot of pre-training tasks. Now, how do we use these user narrations, right? So these user narrations from humans serve as a very nice weak label, right? So it's unaligned. So there will be some, unalignment, right? Like non-alignment between the video demonstrations and the narrations. But, hey, if I can, use this unaligned data and get a really good representation, we can use this representation for, fine-tuning for other downstream tasks, right? And this kind of an approach has shown promise in the recent, work that has been happening in the vision side, right? Okay, fine. So these resources exist. Why do we need Wizard of Oz, right? Like, why do we need a dialogue system? Why do we need a learner system here, right? So we need it because these videos, right? Like the video data. So these data sets, some of them are basically crawled videos from YouTube, right? So these are edited, and the narrations are not targeted towards system development, but they're targeted towards, engaging humans, right? Like they're planned for human viewers, right? So it might not contain that semantically rich information which will be required for training the system, right? So to kind of develop this particular scenario with Wizard of Oz system, we do the data collection in two branches. The first one is what we call post hoc, and the second one is what we call during. So the post hoc is when we use the same videos, right, from where someone has demonstrated, where someone has already cooked, a particular recipe. Then we get, like a human expert who, knows what's being cooked and how to kind of cook. And we get the system in, and the system asks the question about the video to this person in the loop, right? So these narrations could help us get these weak labels, right? The second one is the during, like a process demonstration, right? So this is when, someone is cooking and the system, asks the question to the person who is performing a particular task and get the narrations, and, we have, weak labels. Now there are significant differences in both of these conditions. While the first one, the post hoc, is very easy to get the data, right? Collect a bunch of videos, deploy it on crowdsourcing platform, develop a nice tool to get, like all these narrations, and boom, we have, lots of data, right? In the post hoc scenario. But the during the cooking scenario is where, like a lot of the challenges lie, right? in the previous talk, we saw how like 40 hours of data that Alex was talking about, right? It's very challenging to do such a data collection, right? So we want to use during the process more sparingly, but still go ahead and do this particular data collection. Now, each step, right, in a particular task is represented via a semantic frame. Our semantic frame consists of these semantic slots and values. Here is an example which shows, like someone is saying mix the spices. They are kind of converted into, like a semantic frame, and this helps us leverage, shallow parsers or, like any of the sequence-to-sequence model to kind of extract the semantic slots from the recipes. The second one, which is the task breakdown, right? So each part of the spec document is broken down by human experts into these atomic actions. For example, prepare ingredients involves get eggplant, wash eggplant, get knife, get cut stem part off, etc. Right? So there are all these sentences which are kind of what we call atomic actions. One can argue that these are not completely atomic, but for our domain, we say, okay, this is where we stop. And these atomic actions are designed such that a person who is doing the task can understand and perform them, right? So we break this spec down into the atomic actions. All right, there are so many components here. So how does this whole thing, like look in one picture, right? So on the left, we see the spec document containing an image of a particular step and the corresponding recipe description, right? Like step description, sorry. So this spec document is basically a list with an image and a list of natural language sentences, right? Each of the spec items, which is really one sentence, right, is broken down into these atomic actions, right? Then this is the spec information. Now we come to the video part where there is just the human narrations. So this is the data set. This is the resource that we already have. Right, Epic Kitchen, for example, is a very good data set where there are these narrations that are available. YouTube videos, are available where there is no agent, there is no dialogue system in the loop, simple narrations, and we get the data. Right, with this system, right, with this Wizard of Oz system, with this dialogue, agent, right, what we plan to achieve is to enrich a semantic frame, right? Enriching the semantic frame here means, well, we don't know the extent, for example, right? We want to mix spices and we know we have to be gentle, but we don't know until when we have to keep mixing the spices, right? So that extent is until they're well combined. Because that information is missing in a semantic frame, it can be converted into a question and then posed to the human narrator, right, who is describing the video or performing a given task, right? This is where the question generation model comes in, which is once again a BART model, which converts a given empty slot, a given natural language sentence. It's converted into a question, right? So we get this question in, and the wizard can just with a click of a button choose to ask that question, right? And how can we use this data? Like like the one example that's shown below, right? So. All right, so this is the last slide almost. So I'm almost done. So this is a small video, a snippet of the data that we collected. I'll play the video. So this is a person who is cooking something, trying to,
Can you please tell me what you did?
They're starting to grow. And so I cut them in half and pulled out the part that's growing.
All right, so we got.
It tends to be a little bit.
So we got some purpose, like purpose part of the semantic frame because we don't know why.
Can you please tell me what you did?
Sorry, to do. We have some baselines. For more baselines, please refer to our paper. It's an ongoing work. So we'll have updated models and more data coming out soon. But we ran some recent multimodal clip model and some of the semantic search models like a sentence BERT model for the problem of spec retrieval, and we got some really interesting numbers there. Multimodality helps, right? So that's one of the technical issues, and that gets me to the end. Yeah, thank you. Sorry for being over time. Okay.
Gustavo, can you ask IT to fix this? They're not looking at us. Thank you. We have a small problem with the monitor at the moment. Hold on. I hope, yes. Okay. Are you still with us by voice? I can still see you, but the audience.
Yes.
Okay, now we
I'm
have
here.
your slide back.
Yeah.
Okay, did you have one more slide or was it the last one?
No, this was the last one. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. And now we lost you again. Hold on.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any question from the audience? Maybe while you think, I can ask the first question. So when you showed this example of the gentleman, I guess, explaining what they did, you know, the system prompted, please explain. It sounded extremely hesitant, like the guy was not really knowing what was happening, and he tried to figure out while watching, like, oh, they cut something in half. So did you have that a lot, that it was very hard for your participants to actually, you know, describe what they see?
Yeah, so this comes down to the process execution. So when people are performing a particular task, they're very much engrossed in the task, and their attention is split between answering the questions that the agent is asking and doing the task itself. So that might be one of the reasons why, you know, like there's delay, you know, like, and we do observe, yeah, this latency in terms of hesitancy, as you mentioned, you know, in answering those questions. But there is clearly a difference in when people are just seeing a video and describing their speech rate, for instance, and the amount of information that one gives out. When person is executing a particular step, the amount of information they give out, which helps, is a lot more. So there are things which, you know, people can predict. They can stop executing and keep talking to the agent and then carry on their process. But when describing a video, that's not really, you know, a possibility, because the video is being played back. You know, they can't really stop time. For instance.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Are there questions from the audience? Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. You were talking about semantic fields or seeds, I think, that you need to fill when you broke the text into pieces. And was it a predefined number of seeds, or just was dependent on the text?
Right, so we predefine these slots, what we call, and it's always these, you know, like it falls under one of these, you know, slots. We did experiment with a lot more, you know, initially in our experimentation phase, we started off with nearly 22, and then we kind of kept cutting it down because it was not really useful, you know, like, and transferable across multiple domain, and some of it was too sparse to capture. Yeah, we had to tone it down. We have another field which is others, you know, like anything which is, you know, which doesn't come under this, they, you know, fall under others. But yeah, this is the definition that we're going with, and yeah, this is kind of the only slots that's a step is represented.
And what happened if some seats were not filled, like if they were empty at the end?
Yes, exactly. So it's very much it's very common to have a lot of these slots to be completely unfilled, and this is where the agent comes in, and as someone is describing, they come in and fill them out. So some of them are completely irrelevant, right? Mixing spices, you know, like what direction someone is mixing, any direction is fine. I mean, it's an irrelevant question. So there is some irrelevancy here, and it very much depends on a particular step, right? It's very much dependent on a step and the nature of a particular step and action.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any last question from the audience? If not, then let's thank our speaker again. And similar to the first session, we do have the panel, so can I ask the two on-site presenters on stage, maybe share a microphone, and we get the two online presenters up as well? Yes, perfect. And so what we saw so far is that it's a huge amount of work to even collect, what maybe we could say, well, relatively small amounts of data, a few hundred or thousand conversations, which in the age of deep learning is small, right? So a question to all of you, we start on site and then we go online, is, how would you scale this? Like if you would have unlimited resources, what would you do to actually create like a large scale data set, and large in the sense of, I can use deep learning on it. Do you want to start, Andrea?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a tough question. My suggestion would be to first do some in-depth analysis and then use that to be well informed while gathering your data. So first look at what exactly do I need to collect from my users, what data do I need, maybe do I need additional knowledge graphs to train my system, and then, work from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that process of, first of all, having maybe a qualitative stage to, first of all, get an idea of what kind of needs are relevant, and then scale it up with, I don't know, maybe a crowdsourcing experiment that may, in the best case, also covers some features of that naturalistic or qualitative study, might be a suitable approach for that.
Okay, let's move online to first Abhisek.
Yeah, I would also agree with the two suggestions that the other two speakers gave, and especially like the way I really like the way that Alexander presented during his talk. That can actually be a good motivation, to collect more conversational data. So they didn't actually he actually went and did the conversation, like what are the information need that people are actually having during these different conversations, or what are the different use cases where they are basically using let's say an Alexa Echo or Google Siri, Apple Siri or something like that. So if we have those use cases, and maybe even someone can actually start by analyzing or transcribing these human conversations first, to actually then transfer it to the systematic data preparation and all these things. So I guess that should be the kind of a backbone of all these things.
Okay, and Ramesh?
It's a very complex question, right? I mean, it's mainly because there are a lot of components that go into a typical dialogue system. So if you're talking about, let's say, the visual understanding, there's a lot of pre-training data sets, right, like that we could leverage and learn a good representation. It's unrealistic probably to expect, someone in a small research group, just a few years back, I was a PhD student, and it was just, unfathomable to, get hundreds of GPUs, for instance, to pre-train any such models, right? It's important to kind of leverage these pre-trained representations and then fine-tune for any downstream task. Then a very nice point that was made in the previous session was augmentation using simulations. So self-supervision is a very interesting, how we design self-supervision tasks could be very interesting. It's giving a lot of promising results too. So experimenting similar approaches of self-supervision, this self-talks, or the simulated conversations, for example, to learn a policy could be a very interesting thing to explore as well.
All right, thank you. Do we have a question from the audience for the panel? And while this stews in your minds, and you might come up with a question in the next round, let me continue then. So what we saw here were two domains, right? We saw e-commerce and we saw cooking. And well, cooking might be out of inherent interest or because there's a history in the group that does this. But what would be other domains that would be like interesting to look at, maybe because they're very different from these two domains that there is already work. Let's start online this time. We start with Ramesh. We go the other way around.
Cool. So in fact, one of the domains that we are exploring in parallel is manufacturing in our fabs at Intel. So there's a lot of things that we can that can be shared, like in cooking and manufacturing. It both are intensive, human effort intensive. Both have a lot of similarities in terms of nature of the task, execution itself. There is clearly like other tasks which might be interesting. Like for instance, there's a very nice data set called instructional videos data set, or how to 100 million. There are like bunch of other data sets which are kind of other situated tasks which might be interesting to explore, for sure. But it's yeah, I guess it's very important.
All right, good, thank you. Manufacturing is the answer then. Abhisek, what do you think?
Yeah, so in our paper and also in our group, we actually consistently have this discussion, like where next from e-commerce, let's say. Now, like search systems have been traditionally there for ages now. Similarly, information like if you consider these conversational systems, though they are not per se have been here for decades, but we human actually do converse among each other as well. And that is basically one of these are basically two of the most important aspects or ways in which human actually form their opinions about these different things. And in recent past, we have actually seen that how search engine results and all these things can have some effects on, like there are these different fairness and biases issues in those. And similarly, we have the discourse and how the opinion formation does and what are the ramifications or good effects of these things. So maybe some of those aspects which has already been studied in traditional search systems, but have not necessarily been studied in information, like in a conversational search cases. Like let's say, we actually ask Alexa, like what is the news and what are the, let's say, what is your opinion on so and so things. So while doing such conversations, even those can have some effect on human opinion formation as well. So those are some of the things which maybe a very broad research area that I'm talking about, but these are big picture, some good things to look into, if I may say so.
Okay, thank you. Alexander?
Well, I think that it might also be transferred to the DIY domain in general. I mean, you were mentioning manufacturing. Let's, for instance, consider you're buying a shelf from IKEA. I mean, the instructions aren't always that clear. And I also think that maybe information needs, or the information needs I found in the cooking domain might be also transferred to that DIY domain. I mean, if you might ask, well, how many screws do I need for the bottom plate, for instance? Might be a mount-related one, and then more competence. Yeah, well, how do I actually screw it, or how do I build the bottom plate? How do I build the shelf, which is more, which is more complex and where more guidance is needed. I think that might also be interesting to investigate that approach on DIY, on the DIY domain in general. Yeah.
Okay, DIY, yeah. And last one, Andrea, you have the choice of domains.
Yeah, so I'm very focused on e-commerce, so I'm just shouting out ideas now. I think one thing that sort of relates to all the domains that we've heard about is maybe that people like learn and gain knowledge. So we could maybe also go into the domain of e-learning, so that people can maybe have a more like a tutoring session so that they can learn about a specific topic, so be it DIY or whatever, more into the traditional education. I don't know if there's already work there. There probably is, but I think that's maybe the thing that kind of connects all those domains is that you gain knowledge, and there's this agent, and this agent is able to adapt to what you're saying, and maybe also adapt to your level of knowledge, and then adapt maybe the explanation that you need. So that would maybe be my idea. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So, did the audience? Yes, thank you. We have an audience question.
So, For those in the panel that are collecting data and trying to gather large enough data sets to, for example, for effective evaluation, and that is trying to cover a lot of the competences that we're trying to evaluate in conversational systems, I was wondering if you could speak to asynchronous, to the topic of asynchronous data collection, because a lot of the studies right now that you are talking about are synchronous in that they require a wizard that is actively participating with the user, but this is of course really expensive, and especially in terms of a time commitment, and it requires a lot of moving parts to gather the data. Asynchronous has the potential to really accelerate data collection at the expense of different factors. I wonder if you could speak to what are the things we need to think about and we really need to push for in order to make asynchronous data collection as effective as synchronous.
All right, so that, yeah, very interesting question. And we start on site and then we go online. Who of you wants to give it a try?
I go first. I do see the problem that if you are asking people to annotate later on, that they are maybe responding to a different question. So they're maybe not responding to what is actually happening, but what do they think is plausible that is happening. So that is probably also what the last speaker had in his talk, that it's just they try to make sense of what they see if you have an annotator, and then it just takes a time. It's not that reliable. It's a different thing if you're just asking the person who actually did the thing. So yeah, I think we should really take care that we're asking the right questions to the annotators and make sure that they can actually answer those questions.
Yeah, I mean, it also, I think it strongly depends on what kind of data you wanna get. I mean, asynchronously, I mean, it probably needs to be asynchronously needs to be done when you really want to scale up things. I mean, for let's say annotating information needs in that real world or synchronous scenario, I think so. When you really want to understand information needs, I honestly don't believe that doing this asynchronously would lead to reliable results, because I mean, you need to go. It took me really a lot of months to go to that multiple iterations over the data set again and again to really ensure that the annotation is actually consistent. And I mean, as you said, scaling things up, you probably need to deal with, or when you want to do it asynchronously in the end, you need to probably then accept that some aspects you have or some advantages you have in a synchronous setup won't be there in an asynchronous one. But I think if you aim to put all this knowledge you gained from that synchronous study to actually apply it or implement a system in the end, you need to do it asynchronously to get the data, to then get, for conversational search instance, the appropriate response or the desired response, to also adapt the system from the algorithmic side so that they can get you the information you need. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Going online, Abhisek, what do you think?
I do not have a specific answer for this question, but I would say, let's say, maybe a good source for asynchronous data collection, as the questioner has asked, is maybe we can actually have some industry and academia collaborations on this, because it's basically, let's say, the likes of Amazon, Google, or Apple, they actually, who are actually having these commercial conversational systems deployed, maybe they are the ones who are better suited for the time being to collect asynchronous data, and maybe such collaborations can be kind of bridging the gap between the two, if that is a plausible solution. Maybe.
Okay, thank you. And Ramesh?
There was there were a lot of iterations that we did. It's a very I just don't want to say good, but it's a very interesting question. It's actually an excellent question, because We tried multiple iterations. We had third branch of data collection, what we call self-guided think aloud, where we basically, let people come in whenever they wanted, look at the videos or do process and, do the narrations as they wanted. They would just get like, very simple nudges. Uh, while we didn't test it out in cooking, in manufacturing, it just didn't work. People were not, didn't have any specific incentives, for example, to go and do things to help us get data, right? So it's probably, we can argue it's probably an incentive structure. So it gets down to this point where if we want to get data, like in an asynchronous manner or in a self-motivated manner, we have to define or we have to decide what a good incentive structure is. So, how to get people motivated to do this task. Gamification comes to mind, which, once again, means we have to kind of modify the task a bit. But yeah, it's if there is some approach which works, like very well, we would be extremely happy to use it. But it's been challenging to get data without a dialogue system, without the wizard, etc.
All right, thank you. Is there any more question from the audience? Otherwise, a question I have inspired and also based on the question that Gustavo posted on Slido is that to some extent the setup is artificial in the sense when I use crowd workers, for instance, to check e-commerce sites, they don't really buy, right? So we say, okay, let's have a conversation about buying a TV. And the crowd worker, talks, but in the end, the crowd worker will not buy the TV, right? So the stakes are different in these setups that we have. And similarly, when we do human-to-human interactions, and the human says, I'm kind of like the chatbot, the other side knows you're not the chatbot, you are a human. So again, that changes the conversation to some extent. So what is your view on how important or how dangerous this is in terms of having data that actually reflects the real conversations they would have with a real system when the stakes are high? Andrea, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are two, or I'd like to make two comments on that. So first, I think it's okay to look at like the gold standard of human-human interaction to learn from it. Of course, you have to keep in mind that there are other factors influencing your users if you actually put that into a system. So you need to have like a constant evaluation of is this actually like what I want to transfer into a system, is that actually like what the user also sees? And then the second point is maybe more practical comment, but that there was, at the last CHIIR conference, there was a short paper on realism checks. So it's just two simple questions that you can ask your users after a user study, asking them basically how realistic was the scenario that you were in, and could you imagine yourself actually being in that situation at a later point? And then you can check, for example, like was the scenario overall, was it realistic for my users? And then you can maybe also find out the users for whom it wasn't realistic, so that you can look at that data differently.
All right, thank you. So there is a short paper from CHIIR.
Yeah,
that okay.
not my paper,
no,
but
no.
someone else.
Okay, can you do one more time the title, Realism Check?
I think, yeah, like if you look for realism checks, then you will find it. I think it was Cristani, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, yeah.
Okay. Someone will find it. Thank you. Alexander, what do you think?
That's great that you said that, and I already have the answer, because, I mean, yeah, I think, again, surely it might, I mean, you could do these realism checks and ask these questions, but what I was thinking now was, okay, maybe then the Wizard of Oz setting might be, or maybe you could run a small-scale Wizard of Oz experiment and run the same process, or do the same process with the annotation thing, and then see if there is any difference in the taxonomy, because I think Wizard of Oz, in that case, might also, I mean, you don't get the conversations in depth, but it's more it's closest to the actual setting where you have Alexa in your kitchen and you're cooking something with that. So, I mean, maybe enhancing or run additional experiments to validate, or yeah, experiments with slightly another setup that is maybe even closer to validate your initial results or not, and then you can compare and see if it's okay.
So you need another 45 cooking rounds.
Yeah, yeah, that's quite expensive, yeah, but maybe it doesn't need to be 45 at this.
Okay, thank you. Let's go online. Abhisek?
Yeah, I would actually go with what Alexander said as well. Like, if you have, like, there is this trade-off that we have to basically make. Realism versus the scale. Like, if we actually, let's say, do a survey of, let's say, 2 to 3 people, then probably it will give us some insight, but it may not give us a sizable amount of insight from that which we can actually draw from it. But let's say if we have a large scale survey, and let's say we have a relatively smaller scale survey which can be actually closer to the reality, like let's say we can actually like let's say do a bunch of interviews and maybe some other simulations where the needs can actually be replicated in a better fashion than, like, let's say a regular survey, then that might be a good thing to kind of cross check how good from how distant or close to the reality are we in that sense.
Okay, thank you. And then the last word goes to Ramesh.
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, I think everyone captured the realism aspect of it, but there is another very important privacy aspect to this, right? Privacy and how much of trade-off that we want to have. If we get too much of realistic data, we are kind of getting too much of private information, and something which we want to avoid. Probably even de-anonymization probably doesn't work, right? But yeah, there is that privacy concern which we really have to tackle, and I think that's why it's a very important research question to answer, right? Realism versus privacy, and yeah.
All right. No, thank you. I mean, that's a point that had not come up before, indeed. So privacy is important here too. So I want to thank everyone again. So our 2 online speakers, our 2 on-site speakers. It was great that you all participated independently. You all had different perspectives to bring, and I think we've learned how incredibly hard it is to run any conversational search data collection process with real users. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, there's lunch break now, and then we come back at 1:30.